that much revered of a warrior that they really didn't want to have any parts for him. As long as he was loose in Virginia, they basically stayed inside the fort. And as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do, I mean, this is going to be the last day I'm going to try to really focus on a lot of the story, because I think for the last 4 days I've basically covered quite a bit of the story. You know, I covered a pretty good amount of the story, you know. So so essentially what I'm going to do now is just basically also talk about my painting, you know, what I'm doing in terms of a painting technique, I guess, you know, with this, you know, in terms of just what I'm going to do with the, you know, what I'm going to do with the actual, you know, in terms of developing. I'm also going to just highlight different parts of the story, just so that each one of these shows are not really reiterating too much upon each other, you know, so they can be different, you know, so they won't all be kind of like just me just keep saying the same things over. This painting is called the Abduction of Matoaka. This is the person that is incorrectly and disrespectfully called Pocahontas. Poca again means little, Hontas in Latin, little, and Hontas means whore, or bitch in Greek. And so that's what they were calling her. And all of it, and I have to admit that I just want to say that all of our accounts of the story that we have of everything, Powhatan Tsenacommacah, Opec, Tsenacommacah, Matoaka, all of the stories of all of the natives are from the point of view. Most of them, most of the so-called scholars, especially when you go to the American scholarship, in terms of what the so-called historians have written, it's basically quotes directly from the genocider, John Rolfe, and the other genocider, Captain John Smith. These men both planned one from the very beginning, was to administer genocide upon the native. Also, they already brought African slaves with them in Jamestown, initially on the ship. We're not even going to include because that's documented, and that's what most historians can do. Oh, there's a document that a slave ship showed up in 1619, and therefore the slave ship showed up. There was hundreds of Africans on that ship. But what they don't tell you, they actually brought from England Africans initially to Jamestown. In addition to that, we have a gentleman named Don Luis. That's D-O-N, Don, which is his title, which meant that he was an educated person. He was educated in Spain, although he was African, although he also was previous to that at some time lived in Mexico as well. He had actually traveled to the area of Virginia long before Captain John Smith arrived, long before John Rolfe arrived, and befriended Powhatan Tsenacommacah, befriended the person they call Powhatan, and intermarried into the family. So who knows how many African people that Don Luis brought with him during this period. Of course, from the English point of view, since John Rolfe didn't write about it, since Captain John Smith and some of the other mercenaries, basically, who came there to conquer, they were basically taking information on how to conquer and defeat the Native American Tsenacommacah people. That's basically what their number one job was to do. They pretended to be trying to be friendly. They pretended to try to be peaceful. That all was a pretense, because every single action they did was based on subjugating the original people of the land. It was basically based on taking their land away, killing them. As soon as they got off the ship, as soon as the first people of Jamestown from that expedition, as soon as they got off the ship, they fired upon the natives and killed some of them. That was the first thing they did. That first act. So all of that stuff have been, we come in peace and all this stuff where you see this picture and they got a cross and all that stuff. That's bullcrap. Because they was fighting the Spanish in the West Indies and along the coast of Florida. and along the Carolina coast coming up. And they were trying to get to North American continent and the English was trying to get there and settle there before the Spanish could get there, before the Portuguese and before the Dutch could get there, and the other European powers. So eventually some European powers going to come in and attempt to settle that area. As we know, right after the British landed there, the French landed there and tried to capture just north of them and capture down from the Canada area. So all of these European powers were basically bent on one thing and one thing only. That was conquest. They had no intentions of being friendly to or allowing the Native Americans to coexist with them. The whole situation was for them to bring the Native American into subjugation, and if they could, to totally genocide those people out their lands. And that's what they proceeded to do. Now, they say that the buffalo was supposed to just die of the same the same problems that the Native Americans died of, and that's not true. The buffalo did not die of disease. The buffalo got killed off because the guns of the Europeans was here. And those same guns of the Europeans that was here also killed the Native Americans. I don't believe, because this is the proof. Let's go with actual factual things that happened. Powhatan, Tsenacommacah, Chicano, and Matoaka met Captain John Smith, according to John Smith's own notes, in 1607. So what that would mean is in 1607, she lived all the way to 18 before she died. So all this time, she had a chance to catch whatever virus it is that the English had for her. Not only should she have caught the virus and died, and these are documented people, these are the people that they talk about, but Chicano also came into extensive contact with Captain John Smith. He captured Captain John Smith and kept Captain John Smith amongst his people for some time, for some long while, because they shot Captain John Smith full of arrows, and he had a chance to actually heal from that, recover, and go back to Jamestown, actually. So there's that. So there was plenty of interaction between the colonizers with their diseases and prominent natives like Tsenacommacah and Powhatan, Tsenacommacah, and Matoaka. So these are documented people, as well as countless other documented people who did not break out into any disease and did not die of anything. So a lot of times people tell the little story, because I think with Cortez is that, oh, so many people died of disease. Could it be more people died of your cannons and your guns and your steel breastplates and your steel helmets and your swords and your lances and your horses? Those are some very formidable tools. And so they just simply mowed down like grass the native that was in their way. Just like Cortez, their whole goal was to mow the native down. And the only thing that slowed them down was a few tough leaders like Powhatan, Tsenacommacah, and Tsenacommacah. They slowed the roll. Therefore, they needed Pocahontas to check these guys, because these guys was exceptionally tough. They were exceptionally good warriors. And so, as long as Tsenacommacah and Powhatan, Tsenacommacah and men like them were in the forest, the average invader, English invader, let's call them what they are, let's stop calling them colonizers. The average English invader stayed in that fort. They just didn't want to venture out, because their guerrilla warfare was just that good. And even though they had inferior weapons, their skills at hunting, really, their skills at being stealth was vastly superior to the English. And that's how they were able to prevail against the superior military power of the English. And what this painting is doing, this painting is telling the story of when, I believe it's Captain Argyle and a Mr. Spellman, a Spellberg, was a translator. He was familiar with some of the languages of some of the natives that spoke a similar language further south. And what happened, they used him, and the first thing that Captain John Smith started doing, according to his own records of his journals, he started finding the enemies of Tsenacommacah. He started looking for the enemies. First he had to identify who's the toughest guy in this land. And all the natives pointed to Tsenacommacah. He lives at Powhatan. He's Powhatan. And so, we need to know about Tsenacommacah and Powhatan. So they could pronounce Tsenacommacah. So what they did was they say, okay, Powhatan. We could say that. So now they couldn't say Powhatan. So they didn't want to say that. They didn't want to say Tsenacommacah. So they abbreviated everybody's name down to a shorter version of what their names actually were. But they never could defeat Tsenacommacah. Tsenacommacah was never defeated until he was almost 100 years old. So you can imagine a military leader who was a great man, and he was 100 years old, and they were still in fear of him. Hello, how's it doing, Leslie Johnson? How's it going? Peace. I thank you very much for that. Porsche D, how you doing? Good to see you guys. So he was 100 years old, but his reputation was so great as a warrior, even as an older man. They basically kept their distance from the natives. They stayed close to the waterways. They stayed close to areas where they could escape on ship or go on ship. Was kind of like a transportable boat, you know. So and then they built forts and they ran into the forts. They stayed very close to forts. They stayed very close to waterways that had ships that they could run on out of fear of him, even though he was older. Now, I'm going to go ahead because I've told all the stories. If you want to get into all the other elaborate stories about all the many battles that was fought between the Tsenacommacah and the English invaders. That's what they are. I'm not going to call them colonizers. English invading forces. That's what they were. And their whole idea was to take the land. That's what their concept was. It was nothing else there. And get rich. That's what, just like Cortez did. That's what they wanted to do. Take the land, look for gold. They thought that they might find gold, just like the Incas had gold, the Mayans had gold, the Aztec had gold. And guess what? They thought all the natives had gold of some type. But these particular natives didn't even have metal. They didn't even have metal. Now, why they didn't have metal, I don't know. But some other natives in other regions, mostly going toward the south and toward the west, toward some of those civilizations like the Aztec and the Mayans, they did have metal origin. However, these particular natives did not. Now, did these particular natives have pearls? These particular natives had clamshells and various precious ocean materials and beads and things? Yes, they made elaborate things like that. But for the most part, there was some technologies. There was a lot of technologies. It was I'm not even talking about European technology. I'm talking about Aztec technologies that these particular natives did not have. They just did not have that developed in their particular culture. Their culture was somewhat isolated from the Southwest natives. They traded all the way up to Canada, all the way up to the Great Lakes with other natives, all the way down to even Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. They had relations and they had satellite pockets of their people intermixed with natives through there. And some of the languages had begun to kind of somewhat blend, as well as various cultural blends started to happen. However, nobody knows what really was going on with Tsenacommacah or Don Lewis or any other type of non-native person that might have come from Africa, that might have come from Mexico before the English. They can only pick up from 1607. So the history before that with Don Lewis, and Don Lewis was either Tsenacommacah's father, or either Don Lewis might have been Tsenacommacah himself, because oftentimes when the natives became friends with you, they considered you a brother. You may not have been an actual blood brother. but you would have been as a brother, which would have been indistinguishable. They would not have called you like some type of other thing. You would actually been on a similar status, if not the very same status, as a blood brother. So Don Luis could very well have been Opec Tsenacommacah, because he seemed to have very advanced skills, and he seemed to be one of the natives that was the most aware of the danger of what the British invaders were bringing. It took a while before Powhatan Confederacy actually received that same danger note, before he actually said, oh yeah, these people are very dangerous, and other natives. And what happened was, at the time of this painting right here, Mr. Spellman, or Spellberg, I believe, forget what his name, he had contracted with the Petawa, who were not necessarily a native tribe that was part of Powhatan Confederacy, but a rival tribe. And that's what they found out, and reported back to John Smith. Look, we found out this is a rival tribe, and they might be instrumental in helping us to subjugate the tough tribe, the king of the Powhats, who was also the king of the Tsenacommacah Confederation of tribes. And if we can get control of the Powhats and Powhatan Confederacy, and who is the king of all the confederation of the other tribes that's under him, which is 31 tribes, then we have a chance to use not our small numbers, but natives against native. And the British has always done it. They did that in World War II, man. They used America really, really well. They used a lot of people from India, from Africa, a lot of the countries that they had just got finished ravishing, to help them fight the Germans. That wasn't their fight. Why would he? Why? But anyway, they were good at that. That's what their number one skill was doing. Their number one skill was not going in there and fighting like the native was, hand to hand, man to man. Their skill was about deception, deceit, and manipulation of rivals, and that type of thing, systems and things like that, which they got one native. And what this native did was, he was still friendly with the women. He was still friendly with Matoaka and Matoaka's sisters and Matoaka's aunts. Even though he wasn't underneath their confederation, he was still respectful of Powhatan Confederacy. So he was somewhat independent. Not to say he was not officially part of their tribe. He was not officially in their confederation, but he could have been. He could have been the 32nd tribe in their confederation. But he was a pretty tough person. He was in competition with Powhatan Confederacy. So what happened was, this particular interpreter found this out and passed this information on to the Captain Argyle. And what happened was, this Captain Argyle was on a ship near where they found out Matoaka was. And what happened was, on this ship, they had all kinds of like silver and pearls, because they knew the native likes pearls. They had all kinds of fine pots and pans, and I guess silverware, and perhaps even some gold ingots and trinkets. And of course, tools. The Native American loved axe. They loved the sword. They loved getting tools like that. Of course, the English invaders did not want the natives getting their hands on any weapons made out of metal at all, because that made, all of a sudden, it transformed the Native American into a very, very formidable enemy. Once he got those kind of weapons, they could actually deal with the breastplates and the helmets and the various tools a lot more effectively. So, especially since they always appeared in stealth and was always up close and personal, never fighting from a distance. If they did some arrow warfare, the arrow warfare might have been from a distance, but they never could find out where the arrows were coming from. They never would attack straight out with arrow warfare, just be a rain of arrows, and then they'll disappear. So they were pretty smart to not get shot, you know. So they had pretty good strategy against the muskets of the English invaders. So what happened was, this particular rival chief, or rival Russell Lawrence, what he did was, He was actually a kinsman. He actually married Pocahontas' sister. And Pocahontas' sister was kind of in rivalry with her because Pocahontas was in line to inherit everything. Pocahontas was the one was selected to be the wife of the next king. Her womb was elected to be the holy womb that the next king would, the next princess would come out of, actually. Now, to keep on going with the European system of the king, but the next queen would come out of her womb. So the queen begets the queen, begets the queen, begets the queen. And so the next queen was going to come out of the womb of Matoaka. And so that's why Matoaka was very, very important. And she was very brave. She was, the men were very stealth. They were hard to catch. You could not capture a man. But the women were they were more in place. They were at the villages. They basically farmed. They was always in a certain location. They were easier to locate. They were easier to interface with and talk to. And so with that, you found Powhatan Tsenacommacah interfacing with some of the younger colonials that was her age, that was not so intimidating. You know, the teenage boys. And what was happening was these British boys were, you know, they come from a very Christian background. And Pocahontas was walking around buck naked. She had nothing on. At that age, she absolutely wore nothing. They were playing games. And I believe there was some even promiscuity going on at that level with, not even with John Rolfe, not even with Captain John Smith. But once Captain John Smith and John Rolfe saw the activities was going on, they was ready to join in. There was no women there. And why the young boys gonna have all the fun? Well, the older men could go and have some fun too. So that's basically what happened. So there was multiple reasons to capture her. First of all, she was a very prized person. And Powhatan Tsenacommacah was already attacking them. Opechakano, his brother, was already attacking them. His much younger brother. I mean, you're talking about a grandfather that probably in his 50s had a child by a much younger woman and produced Powhatan Tsenacommacah's much younger brother. So their age differences might have been up to 50 years between Powhatan Tsenacommacah and Opechakano. So both of these men were big, tall men, strong build, and fierce warriors, very feared warriors, actually, in their own right. But during the time where when Captain John Smith and John Rolfe appeared, Powhatan Tsenacommacah was already a somewhat older gentleman. He was still his reputation went before him. He still could do some pretty bad damages on the battlefield, and there is some records that he was able to do that. But why should he when he has all these great brothers like Opechakano that did a much better job? And since they were not the premier Matoaka, they were not the premier king. They were just simply the king of their own particular tribe or their own particular group, which Opechakano was the king of the Pamunkey. He was the king of the Pamunkey. And also his mother came, or somebody else in his family, was affiliated with the Mattapanai. So he was affiliated with the most populated tribes. And of course, since he's the brother of Powhatan Tsenacommacah, so somehow affiliated with Powhatan Tsenacommacah, he's also affiliated with the Powhatan tribe, which is one of the most dominant male tribes in terms of warriors. They produced the most intense warriors. So that's what we got there. And those warriors lived close to the holy place, the Powhatan, which is the Bon Air of Richmond. And if you was to go to a place called Shimbarazapok today in Richmond, and look over the James, and if you look towards the southwest, you will see actually Powhatan. And you'll be standing in what used to be Powhatan. Powhatan. And basically, that was Powhatan Hill. There was another word that added to it that means hill. Native American word, which kind of escapes me right now. But so you were at Powhatan Hill, which got later named to Churchill. But anyway, during the time of this, what happened was Argyle got her to get on a ship with various pearls and ingots, and it said it was safe. They were going to have nice food, and she could probably smell the food. And she got on the ship, and upon getting on the ship, she was sieged. She was seized, and she became a captive from that point on. And many of the riches that she thought she would be getting was given to her brother-in-law and her sister, who basically betrayed her and turned her in for some tools and for some jewelry and for some pots and pans made out of whatever metal. And basically that was it. And also there was a deal that once Powhatan Confederacy was dealt with and brought under subjugation, that the person that the English was going to favor was going to be the brother-in-law that was a traitor. He would become the premier Wesleyan. He would become the premier king. No longer will Powhatan Confederacy be the premier king, and no longer will his brother be next in line to be the premier king. But this other weaker brother-in-law would actually become the king. So that, even though he wasn't really involved with their crowd, because it was this sister relationship between Matoaka. That was the connection. So you had that kind of thing. They found out who these people were. They did some investigation. They found out the rivals. And that's where the treachery happened. So what they did was they basically just handed Matoaka over, buck naked, to Captain Argyle. And basically he took her on board, seized her, and from that point on she was a prisoner. They brought her to the Jamestown colony fort, where they kept her in tight, restricted space with a bunch of soldiers around her. So what happened when Tsenacommacah found out what was going down, he got with his brother. He said, "Oh man, this ain't gonna happen, bro. Let's go in there and deal with these people once and for all," because he never liked them from the beginning. The person who was the diplomat was Powhatan Confederacy. He kept talking to him. He said, and when Tsenacommacah said, "Now, you believe what I've been telling you all along? These people are the enemy. We should deal with them. So now they've taken your favorite daughter. They've taken your number one person. They found out who the important people are here. And they're taking her down. They're going to kill her just like they killed all the other women and men that they have encountered. There is no reason for them to leave her alive." And what they did was they had enough communication with their translator to get the word back to him that if they valued Matoaka, that he would surrender to them, that he would give up the fight, and that basically what happened was Captain John Smith and Captain John Roth and the various powers that ran the colony would basically be able to live in peace and continue to build their settlement, to continue to pursue their invasion. So that's essentially what's going on. But Powhatan Confederacy didn't want to have no part. He was just, he was a warrior himself. He was just as tough as his younger brother. He said, "Let's go get her." And of course, Tsenacommacah, he was all about it. He was all about it. And it didn't take them much to breach their fort. So that's what this painting is about. The warriors have breached the fort. The colonials are using their long guns and their swords and whatnot to fight back. But the natives are using their bows and arrows, and they're using their surprise attack, their spears, and they're using their quick attack with the tomahawks to get in close and do the damage. Because what happens is, what they found out is once the colonial shoots a shot, especially if he misses, or even if he hits one of them, he had to take a certain amount of time to put the powder back down the musket with the long stick that they had. He had to drop a ball in there, then he had to pack that in, then he had to get the flint ready, then he had to aim it again. So by the time, that took about a minute or so. That took about 90 seconds. So within 90 seconds time, the native was right there with his tomahawk. He was right there with his spear. And so basically they were able to go in with knife, spear, and tomahawk, and maybe a small shield, and do the damage. And then whatever peripheral that needed to be covered, they had natives positioned with arrows to cover for the frontal attack. So what you have is Tsenacommacah coming in with the, and he was able, since he's a king, since he's a Wezawarks himself, or a prince at least, he was able to get a European tool for his tomahawk. But Powhatan Tsenacommacah being old school, he's used to his traditional weapon. He's very good with that weapon. I have him with a traditional weapon going in. But since Don Lewis is probably related to Tsenacommacah in some way, if not was Tsenacommacah, because what happened was they said that this person was taken from that area, somehow brought to Spain. So some other Europeans were dealing with this area before the British showed up. And finally he came back to his native area, educated his people about everything that he had discovered about these different people, this different world, this different society. And his warnings were not necessarily taken by the leaders, even the premier leader, Powhatan Tsenacommacah, until they start seeing for themselves, these people are in fact trying to kill us. These people are in fact, on the one hand, they kind of pretend like they want to be friendly with us and they want to trade with us, they want to be nice. But then on the other hand, and they always are lying, they always have deceit with them. So it became very clear eventually with Powhatan Tsenacommacah that there was going to be no peace. However, they had, between Tsenacommacah and Powhatan Tsenacommacah, they had two different approaches. Powhatan Tsenacommacah realized that they could kill a lot of the colonials. They had superior numbers, but it came at a cost. Many of their warriors died. And what the English would do is attack the village and kill many of their women and children. So there was a reprisal, and they were learning. Captain John Smith would learn. He was using human shields all the time. He had already taken a boy once before when he was surprised and ambushed by the natives, and basically covered his body to the point of roping the boy to himself so he couldn't get away, so that they wouldn't be able to shoot him with any arrows, so they couldn't attack. So he was using villages as pawns. Basically, if they had did anything to their colonials, they would go into a village and wipe it out. You do something to our colonials, we found out what a village is, where it's mostly women and children, we'll go in there and we wipe it out. So that's what Powhatan Tsenacommacah was dealing with. He was dealing with the fact that they was wiping out a village every time that the men would attack. And then what the men had to do was they had to stay back and watch the villages. They couldn't hunt, they couldn't fish. So the natives was losing a lot of their livelihood because they couldn't eat the way they wanted to eat. They couldn't live the way they wanted to live because they constantly had to stay back with the women and watch. And most of the time the British was inside of the forts just chilling out. And the natives were getting crippled to some level as well because they were more or less inconvenienced. I wouldn't say crippled, but inconvenienced. So what happened was, Powhatan Tsenacommacah said, it's better if we just do this with diplomacy. We don't bother them much. They don't bother us much. But that proved to be wrong because what happened was another ship came, another ship came, and another ship came, and they start building up, bringing in more weapons, more soldiers, whatever they needed to deal with the natives. And if they would have listened to Tsenacommacah from the beginning, they could have wiped them out when their numbers were smaller. But instead, they didn't. So this is at that one crucial time when finally Powhatan Tsenacommacah got it. But at this point, it was probably too late. They had other ships like Captain Argyle there. They had multiple ships. They were on the prowl. They was looking for key people. They had their interpreters out in the field living amongst natives that's hostile to Powhatan Tsenacommacah and trying to find a way to get the natives to attack. They would never attack Powhatan Tsenacommacah, but they did eventually get them to do this particular trick by using Matoaka because they found out that they paid an extreme amount of reverence to Powhatan, to Tsenacommacah and Matoaka, and certain people. They respected these people very much. These people were considered divine people. So the English decided to use that to their advantage. Let's get a very important noble person amongst them that they would never kill for, because I strapped a boy to me. He was an important boy of somebody important, and the natives would not fire upon me as long as that boy was strapped to me. So let's get Matoaka. Instead of us having to go out and risk ourselves and attack their village and perhaps get a counterattack and some of us die, what we can do is just keep her as ransom to keep Powhatan off of us. And we happen to know that he cares so much about her, he's not going to allow his warriors to attack. And that worked. So for those years, from 1612 to 1613, when he captured her officially and held her against her will, it wasn't a peace. It was basically a ransom. It was not peace. It was basically a ransom so you don't attack. If you call that peace, I guess it was peace. But at the same time, the English continued to be aggressive and assertive, and they continued to kill the people. So what happened was that was a move that basically put Powhatan in check. It didn't put him in checkmate, but it put him in check. It basically confounded what he could do in terms of attacking. Because every time when Tsenacommacah or any other native leader went to attack the fort, they would simply put her up on a ledge high up and put the knife to her throat like they was going to kill her. And the natives would stop because they knew who she was. And then they would just simply have a little meeting amongst themselves and retreat and go back. Then they would say, okay, we're done with this. We're going to attack anyway. So they'll go and they attack. Then they say, look, we sent to Powhatan. He said, don't. So they would retreat and they would go back. Even Tsenacommacah wanted to. They would retreat. But finally, Tsenacommacah convinced Powhatan, let's take this thing. So they went and they broke into the fort. They had breached the walls of the fort. They were inside of the fort. They had killed a lot of the colonials. They had basically defeated them in that rush of the fort. And the only thing that stopped that particular takeover of the fort, and basically would have ended Jamestown, was the fact that John Roth held the knife, or it could have been Captain John Smith, but one of them held the knife to Matoaka's throat. And that's when you have Tsenacommacah tell Tsenacommacah, his brother, stop. Because the brother was going to probably let her get sacrificed for the good of the people. He probably would say if he kills her, he was going to call it bluff. I mean, Tsenacommacah was a tough guy. He was used to taking risks. He didn't have any fear of anything. So he was going to call it bluff. Go ahead and kill her. But just know, the second you kill her, you're dead too. So there was a bluff that went down. And in that bluff, what happened was the person who called quits on it was Tsenacommacah. He backed down. And the natives retreated. And from that point on, the chances of them getting control and driving the English out became less and less and less from that point on. So again, this is around 1613 to 1614 when this particular event happened. Now this event was talked about, but this event wasn't painted. Now there was an artist who did a rendering or a painting or etching or something about Matoaka getting abducted, but it was the native and her sister basically standing out by the shore, basically getting the treasure and turning her in. And then of course it was Captain Argyle basically standing on her ready to take her on the ship. And then of course she's on the ship abducted. That was the English point of view. We got her. And by having her, we stopped the bad natives from being able to stop our colony from happening. And when several years later, I think in 1618, when they were in England, and 2 children was born, 2 boys. Now, whether the first boy was actually John Rolfe or not, I don't know, but at least one boy was. One boy stayed in England, the other boy came back to the New World. Thomas Rolfe came back to the New World. But even when he came back to the New World, he joined the side of the British against his own people as a soldier in a fort. And he was in charge of a garrison, fighting his own people. So he had become completely under the sway of his father, John Rolfe. And even though they say, John Rolfe says, and other people in that family say, well, he actually met Tsenacommacah. He met him, his uncle, because his grandfather was already dead by this point. So the only person that was left when John Rolfe came back, and that's why John Rolfe came back, because they found out, well, Tsenacommacah is dead, so Matoaka has no value to us anymore. As a matter of fact, the boy might have some value, but Matoaka, maybe he doesn't. But Matoaka has no value. And then all of a sudden, Matoaka mysteriously dies. Now, the story is she died of disease. The reality is she was probably poisoned. Because she had 11 years to die from a disease coming from the English. She stayed in England, even if she got a big dose when she was in Europe, she still was there for some time. She wasn't there like for a few days and got sick. A few weeks, she was there for a good little piece of time. But it wasn't, and they were going to do a 90-day voyage, 60 to 90-day voyage to get back to Virginia. So before they could even get downstream, down the river, to get into the bay, to get out into the Atlantic Ocean, she had already died. Just all of a sudden she was healthy, then she died. And then even according to John Rolfe, this is all information according to John Rolfe, because there's only one time Matoaka was quoted that it wasn't John Smith talking for her or John Rolfe, and that's when the negative information came out to tell you that she basically hated John Smith. And she scorned him and she ridiculed him. And she basically talked about how he terrorized her people and herself in the New World. That was the English people who was witnessing this conversation. So she had some ability to say some kind of broken English at that level. And her behaviors were telling everything, really. However, and it took her hours, took her half of a day almost, just to get herself together so she could talk to him again, to see him. Not to even really have, and then when she did, she formed her words to say very, very scolding things that basically Captain John Smith had to shut the conversation down because it got to be very asinine very, very quickly. So the relationship about them being lovers, I doubt it very seriously, because the only time where John Rolfe or Captain John Smith doesn't speak for her and somebody else speaks for her who happens to be British, who's a neutral party, it's very, very negative. So the story of the Native American says she was raped, not just by Captain John Smith and John Rolfe, but other people that was in the colony. Now, just to show you exactly the attitude that they had, going fast forward all the way to 1649, after Tsenacommacah was already about 100 years old. So you can imagine this man is very, very strong, very, very tough warrior. But at this point, he's 100 years old. Only then, with superior weapons, with superior cannons, and a lot of your people now are left London, and now they're here in Virginia, you're going to go after an old man. And you're going to basically not even fight him as an old man. What you're going to do is tell him, we're going to sue for peace, and we're going to meet you at Powhatan, the holy place where, according to your religion, that there can be no killing there. So since there can't be no killing there, and they probably have taught peace there before, they probably had a history of the colonials and the natives going there talking peace. And we're going to discuss a final piece because you're an old man now and you're a king. You took your brother's place, Tsenacommacah. He's gone and he wanted peace. And now that you're an older man, Tsenacommacah, we want peace. And what they did was they got his best warriors in the middle of the field, gave them wine until they were drunk, and pretended to be friendly with them. Then the soldiers backed off with their long guns and shot them all down in an open field. And then, I forget what this gentleman, well, I'm not even call him a gentleman, but he was the person who took John Smith's place. He shot him and injured him. And then he survived that. Then they captured, even at 100 years old, he shot him. He survived a musket fire. Then they got him in custody. He healed evidently somewhat from that because they paraded him through the street, ridiculing and mocking him and laughing at him. Kind of almost just imagine Jesus being mocked. Imagine, that type of scenario. Similar type of thing. All of a sudden, here's this great king. Or imagine Cleopatra in Rome being mocked by the Romans. Same thing. He was this great warrior. He's now older. All his toughest soldiers are now tricked and killed. And he was deceived. Basically, it was an ambush, and he was shot. But he survived even that. And I think it was just tough mentality. And then finally, they paraded him through the street. And as they paraded through the street, one of the people that was parading him, that was guarding him in the parade, shot him in the back and killed him. Because the rumor amongst the natives is that the English could not kill him because he was divine. So even though they was making fun of, I'm pretty sure that might have been a couple of native sympathizers or natives in the crowd. And finally the guy said, okay, he can't die, huh? Boom, and blew him away. And that was it. That was the end. And even then, he still was able to talk before he died. Because you got to remember, he was a younger man, so he had already had maybe 60, 80 years with the English. So his English had gotten okay enough to communicate. He said, look, if it was I who captured you, talking to the person who took Captain John Smith's place, if it was I who captured you, I would have disposed of you in private with some dignity. I would not have paraded you through the streets, through my village and tried to humiliate you. And then he died. So even in death, he had more dignity. Being a person called a savage, he had much more dignity than the so-called civilized person who was behaving more savagely than the so-called persons they were calling savages. Who was a savage? Because they were savage because they had more primitive tools? Were they savage because they had more primitive resources? Or they're savage simply because they were less humane, defending their own home lands and defending their own women and children? That was honorable. The people who were savage, that was raping, who was killing, who was lying and deceiving, and never pursuing peace, who came there for the whole purpose of conquest, was always the English invaders. Therefore, there was always called Mabola, person, snake mouth, snake tongue. Liar, basically what that meant. Deceiver. And that was their reputation from that point on. And at the death of Tsenacommacah, he was the last great king of the Tsenacommacahs. Because all the other kings after that, and of course his other half-brother that took his place, after he died, basically conceded half of the state of Virginia to the colonials. He just gave it up. He just said, okay. And basically it effectively separated the northern natives that's from Richmond area, north towards Fredericksburg, from the southern natives from the Richmond area going towards Petersburg all the way down to the Carolinas. They separated those groups. And then separating that messed up a big power base amongst the Tsenacommacahs. And then that was they were never strong enough to mount any kind of offensive again. and they were fragmented, and the English quickly went in, basically for the kill. And what happened was, when it was time for them to, when the Tsenacommacah had the upper hand, they was always trying to say, oh, show some humanity, help us, we're starving, be nice, we're going to trade, we're going to be intermarrying with you, we want peace. That's at least what's said. But the second the strong men were dead, Tsenacommacah, Powhatan, the whole story changed, because it started to become, okay, you see, there's no good native, the words they used for them was Indian. No good Indian but a dead Indian became a slogan. Basically, and that was the part of the course, basically, that's how they dealt with the native. They would shoot first, ask questions later. That's how it worked. And so all of that kindness and wonderfulness and Thanksgiving attitude, or whatever that fake thing was they invented later, was never a truth. So now that I've kind of taken that much time to at least start out the day with the story time basic part is somewhat dealt with. So what I'm going to do is go in now and start getting some other elements into the painting. So I think I'm going to start painting in some of Powhatan's warriors, simply because I just want to paint some of his warriors and get them in. And they're toward the middle of the painting. So I'm going to focus on those guys for right now. And let me adjust my stool a little bit. There we go. And then I'll start working on this side, some of the background soldiers. I already have basically, I don't have Captain John Smith, who's injured there on the ground, because I have the main villain with the knife. That is, because he's the one that actually wound up doing the most damages to Matoaka. He's the one that had her in captivity. He was probably the one paying some colonial to keep her captive until she was tenderized enough for him to come in and basically finish the seduction course, that was running on her, or to actually rape her himself. So that's the way it is, and that's the way it went. So I'm going to start out with a number 2 round and a number 1 round. And because these are more smaller details in this area, and I really want to come in here nice and tight and small, somewhat small, start getting some of these natives in. So I'm going to start by working again into the shadow areas, and I'm going to get a little bit of Daxodon purple and some raw umber, and of course I can get now more into, now that I've told the story, because for me it's important for me to tell the story, but now that I've gotten into some of the story, I can now focus on the painting more. But I just want people to know the real history. This is one of the reasons I'm making this painting, because the real history just never has been told, and I just find offense with that. That's a problem for me. And I don't think that these villains should get away with their lie going forward like the truth forever. I think it's time now. They have a saying that all bad things come to the light. All lies eventually come to the light. I don't know if that's true or not, but let's see, because I'm definitely exposing it. So let's see if the truths eventually get dealt with or not. Or would there be people who rebuke the truth and would still prefer the lie? And even worse, do people even care? And that's the problem. They say that if you let atrocities go and you don't remember the atrocities, that what's going to happen is they're going to repeat themselves. So I think it's very important for people to remember the atrocities, and for the atrocities not to repeat themselves. And I just think that's very, very important. And else, there is a grave risk. We can see this happening now in modern politics, where certain people start talking a certain kind of conversation, and other people are starting to get hurt. You know, people are starting to walk into churches and synagogues and just up to random people and just basically shooting them for being different. So, yes, we have to remember these things. I mean, the country has changed, but if we as people don't step up, if we don't actually make the full acknowledgement of what's right, culture and society will just simply crumble. And I think that's what's going on right now. It's just that I think society has just gotten to the point where I blame also the internet to some level. I think society has gotten to the point where nobody cares. You know, it's like, okay, I'm on social media, I'm watching the Netflix or whatever, and I really don't care about much else. And I really do think it's that bad. As long as I'm entertained and in my little vacuum, my little bubble of life, I'm with me and mine, I'm not going to worry about anybody else's problems. And that's not good. Because what that creates is a situation where people forget. Like I said, the truth is distorted, and then usually the truth is distorted to protect the guilty. I mean, why are we into a position where we're protecting bad people who deserve their bad reputation? It's not like that. It's not deserved. The reputation, what has happened is the truth. And if the truth happened, it happened. Now, if the truth has been reconciled, or if the person has tried to reconcile, or the persons have changed, and that's no longer a situation that needs to be focused on, that's one thing. But when you see things repeating, well, that's a whole different matter right there. And that's a situation that definitely needs to be addressed. It definitely needs to be dealt with. Because if it doesn't get dealt with, what's going to happen is, I'm convinced that there is reciprocal generational occurrences of certain things, certain frequencies, certain things that never got reconciled, things that never got properly dealt with. And because those things were allowed to prevail, they go on, they repeat. It's like a big giant scorekeeper. But instead of the scorekeeper saying, okay, now let's let this side win a little bit, the scorekeeper rewards the person who actually was able to get away without suffering a penalty. And then, of course, what happens is that person who got away repeats. I mean, it's kind of like a child. A child does something mischievous, but the parent doesn't scold the child. It doesn't correct the child. The parent just ignores the problem. And what the child does later is the child gets worse. Okay, I got away with that. So what else I can get away with? And the parent ignores that, pretends like that didn't happen. What does the child do? The child ups it a little bit, get a little bit worse. And that keeps happening until finally the parent blows a cork and overreacts. Then the parent looks really bad, because now the parent let the thing get out of hand in the first place. Instead of correcting it when it was a small problem, they allowed the thing to turn into a much larger problem. So whose fault is that? Is the fault of the child? Or is it the fault of the parent who looks the other way? I say the child is doing exactly what they're supposed to do, with any other natural thing would do. If something is allowed to get away with something, that thing is going to become normalized. It's going to become acceptable. You know, it's okay to do this. You know, it's all right to do this because there was no punishment. So therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it again because that was very pleasurable. You know, I did something really intense, really wrong, and I got away with it. I'll try that again. Then they try it again, they get away with it. Then they try it another time, they get away with it again. Then they become kind of like enabled. It's like normal. And then when they're corrected, they're looking like, oh, why did you correct me? Even though they're completely wrong, they don't even understand their own wrongness because they were allowed to get away so much with their atrocities, with their wrongness. Until even when they're corrected, they don't even see it as wrong anymore. They don't even see it as a wrong thing. Because I got away with this so many times. Why would this be wrong if I kept getting away with it? I mean, I've always done it this way. How come now you decide to speak up? Well, you noticed it was wrong for a long time, but you just ignored it. And then you ignored it again, and then you ignored it again, until it got to the point where you couldn't ignore it anymore. It's up in your face. And it's bad, it's ugly. And you wanted to stop. But the person that's perpetrating it doesn't even see it as bad. They don't even think they should stop. Matter of fact, it is in fact become normalized. It's normal now. And you're abnormal for wanting to correct that person. And that's where the actual sin happens. That's where the actual wrongdoing takes place. The wrongdoing takes place when suddenly the person decides they're going to finally try to do the right thing, step up. But the person who has been getting away, now they're going to put their case out there. You never said anything before. I never saw anything wrong with it before. I was never corrected on this before. So why am I getting corrected right now? What's the reason for this? That's not normal. That's never been done. Or if it was done in such a way that it was not taken seriously. So why are we getting serious right now? So that's what this painting is about. It's about the actual moment where Opec Chicano and Powhatan Tsenacommacah go in and try to finally correct the wrongs. They finally had too much. But the English had become way too bold. The English had become strong in their bad deeds that was gone unpunished. Powhatan Tsenacommacah might have been tough, but I indeed think that Matoaka was right to say that she did strike fear in him. I think there was fear on both sides. I think the colonials was in fear of Powhatan Tsenacommacah and what he was able to do and what his soldiers and warriors were able to do. But on the same token, Captain John Smith was afraid of what the native warriors could do. Both sides were afraid of each other. And I'm sure that Powhatan Tsenacommacah had taken out his share of people to dominate that area. He had them taken out some other tribal leaders. And with the thing that they would tend to do, and what was marked also by Captain John Smith, and I think that's why Captain John Smith may not have had any real mercy on Tsenacommacah or Chicano, because he knew that these guys have been practicing this also on the local people. They've been the power in the land. That's why we should take these people seriously, because they know how to wreak some havoc. I mean, I've heard their reputations and I've actually seen them at work. These are some pretty tough dudes. And I definitely don't want to get underneath their jurisdiction, because they could just change on me also. So you did have a little bit of that going on, but at the same time, you had a gentleman that was Tsenacommacah was in his later years. I believe that his most of the time, the way he solved issues was as a dominant king. He would come in. What happened was, whoever the Wars of Warrants was of that tribe would offer one of his daughters. It generally had to be one of the better daughters, the prize daughter. And then they would basically have they would come to an understanding, And he would basically leave. He would impregnate that daughter with some children. Every time he came to visit, his goal was to impregnate her. As a matter of fact, when John Smith recalls, after when Chicano came to captured him, and he actually came to visit, he was actually brought to Tsenacommacah. Tsenacommacah is in his longhouse that had suspended mats as beds. So his mats were suspended from the ground, so he did not sleep on the ground. And there were several mats, one upon the next. They all were suspended, and he was on top of those. It was kind of like bunk beds, I would imagine, something like that. And at his head was his main wife, because a king could have many wives. He could have a bunch of wives, because it was very important for the king to have a bunch of wives, because that's how we ensued peace. I'm married to your daughter, and that's the whole reason. I think that John Rolfe had for his relationship with her. I think he was trying to justify that to some level. And so in justifying that, he got him a very, very young lady against her will, and basically the rest is history. He produced a baby with her, and produced at least 2 sons that we think was his, at least anyway. We think that they was his. But he was, there is no record that they captured one boy. What they did was right after, and the reason I think that it was definitely planned is because Cocoon, that was actually her husband. She was already married to someone. And or betrothed, but I don't know if but it's rumored amongst the Mattaponi that they were married and actually had according to the holy words, basically, which according to the Mattaponi is basically somebody's family records, but it's the chief's family records. So it's the West of Lawrence. But at this point, they call themselves a chief. So that Cocoon was actually her husband, not somebody betrothed to her. But shortly after her capture, the English killed him. Or perhaps John Rolfe had him killed. because he had plans for Matoaka. And those plans involved him marrying her and becoming basically the king of the New World, just like Powhatan Tsenacommacah was, just like Tsenacommacah was actually became. He thought somehow that he could become the king of the New World. By kidnapping against their will and having babies with Matoaka. He felt like that was a plan, and he went about his way to execute that plan. You know, he basically did everything he needed to do to make that happen. And for the most part, it happened. Like I say, and just the second wife now of John Rolfe was Matoaka. His first wife, I forget exactly what her name was a British woman. She had died on a ship too, just before she left, was leaving for Bermuda to come to the New World. She just up and died. Same mysterious causes, just for whatever reason, she just got sick and died. Or something happened and she died. So this seemed to be a convenient thing with John Rolfe, that these women would die. So, and then also given the fact that he would do some of the tricks that Captain John Smith was doing, like hold a woman ransom, hold a knife to her throat, to keep the father and the uncle from attacking the fort. Who holds their own wife at ransom with a gun, with a sword, with a knife to her throat, to keep the father-in-law from killing you and attacking your fort? And how does she love the person who is doing this? I mean, how is that possible? I mean, is that a possible scenario? Is that a possible truth? I mean, do human beings behave that way? And the only way I could know that is I would have to ask a random person that don't even know this story. Could you love the person who abducted you from your father, stole you? He's a complete foreign person that you don't even speak the same language with him. And he holds a knife to your throat right in front of your father who's come to rescue you and your uncle, and calls for a retreat, or else he's going to kill. Could you actually love that person? Yes or no? And, you know, you have to ask a woman that, you know. I don't know if a man could answer that properly. You know, women might do different things than men do. You know? She could have had Stockholm Syndrome, where the person who had abducted her, she began to comply with them. Or she could have just been held at ransom. And the only persons that ever talked for her, you know, all of the records that the history books in America quote is from the perspective of a mercenary and an enslaver, John Rolfe, and a genocider, John Rolfe, and another enslaver, genocider, and mercenary, John Smith, and other enslavers and genociders. Because again, these guys weren't no innocent people. They brought slaves with them to Jamestown. The slaves was right there in Jamestown working as slaves during the time of this attack, probably. You know, I'm pretty sure some slaves escaped and joined the natives during this particular attack too. I mean, they seized their opportunity. Got the heck out of Dodge, man. You know, time out for this, man. This can't be happening right, chump. You know, we out of here. Okay, we're gonna seize the opportunity. So, however, Matoaka, the person who was important, she didn't get away. I mean, basically, she still had the knife to her neck, literally. I mean, does it? I know. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and put myself, because I'm a male, I'm a man. But I'm gonna put myself. I'm gonna imagine if I was a female, some person. I'm just pick any old person. Let's just say a terrorist, since that's the scariest thing we can have right now. Say a person from the Middle East. I'm a woman. He captures me. I'm in my own land, which is the USA. They've invaded. And they have me amongst them. And they already been raping me. Having sex and all kinds of stuff like that. I had a husband, you know, somebody that I probably loved and cared about. My family cared about. Known him all my life. Was a very good, not upstanding man. He's dead. I have a daughter with him, which is important. Never get to see her again. I mean, but yet, these same people can tell a positive story about Pocahontas helping the English. With all of that evidence that she probably most likely lived in terror and fear. It's amazing. People can see whatever they want to see. No matter how wrong it is, if that's in the interest of that person, they don't see it as wrong. They see it as right. Now, in a sense, a lot of people are very tribal in their outlook in life. You know, this is us and that's them. This is me and that's that. And at some point, tribalism is going to go away because we can travel. Well, coronavirus is changing that to a certain level. But we can travel almost anywhere now. I mean, we can travel all over the earth. I mean, join country people are traveling and leaving Africa and going to China and leaving China and going to Africa. So, same thing with Europe. I mean, people all over the place. People coming to the U.S. I mean, they've been doing that all along. I mean, the U.S. has been kind of unique. I'm not going to even say the U.S. The Western Hemisphere has been invaded by multiple nations for many, many centuries now. So, but now it's a trend amongst the whole planet, Earth. It's a regular thing. It's something that no doubt will continue. So knowing that to be the case, tribalism can't win. It can't. It's going to lose. Because what's going to happen is people are going to eventually, as they disperse, they're going to blend slowly over time. Now, it's been proven that there is a dominant culture that generally wins that battle. They generally are the people who are more upward mobile, people who tend to be more on the beautiful side of things. You know, and that's how people select. I mean, you can look at it. Even if you look at the African American guy, he started out poor, but he can play basketball really, really well. And in playing basketball, he becomes very, very wealthy. I mean, really wealthy. And he winds up marrying an African American young lady. But then after a while, he divorces her. He has a bunch of kids with her while he's going on his way up. And then he finishes off his life married to a beautiful blonde, blue-eyed, or Caucasian woman, a white woman. You know, that happens. You look at, I'm going to say 90% of African-American male celebrities. That is the case. They get rich, and the power goes to the beautiful woman. In case of Opak Chicano, he got shot in the back. Once they had him pinned down, captured in the trick, they just treated him like a piece of trash. They didn't give him any respect at all. Shot him in the back, man, like a dog in the street, because they were parading him around like a dog. They weren't treating him with the respect that they said they was going to get Powhatan Tsenacommacah. Now, the difference is Powhatan Tsenacommacah never got caught. Now, I'm sure if Powhatan Tsenacommacah got caught, it'd have been the same deal. If he'd have got all his warriors ended in a trick. And that's where the diplomacy actually wins. In a sense, Powhatan Tsenacommacah, for 50 years or so, 40, 50 years, kept the superior power at bay. In a sense, the much more aggressive physical Opak Chicano fell for Okadoke move. You know? I mean, he knew enough not to trust him, but then all of a sudden in his older age, why did he go back to trusting? I mean, was it that his older age has tenderized him to the point where he just had a lack of judgment? I think so. I think what happened was, a lot of people get that way. They get older and they just get a little bit more softer boiled. You know? And they forget who the enemies are. They forget the reason that they were supposed to be cautious in the first place. And what happens is, and you can see that with people like what happened to Gaddafi. I mean, some people say he's a bad guy, depending on what your perspective is. Some people say he was a good guy. I'm happen to thinking that he was a person who loved his people. And he might have been a dictator, but looking at the status of that country now, and the status of that country when he was in charge, I'm going to say he was a good guy. Because whatever group of people who took over after him, they didn't put as much work into making sure that they were put back together right. Not the same work they took into killing him, getting him out of power. Seemed like to me they didn't really care about any people that he might have been subjugating. Seemed like to me they just cared about killing him. It seemed like to me they treated him, if you wanted to see how they did in the older age of Opak Chicano at 100 years old, look at the modern photos of Gaddafi dead by treachery. You know, he was dealt the deal that everything was cool. I mean, the U.S. even got a black president. I think he was a little bit at ease. He started to relax. He saw that as things is changing, and I think that's what Opak Chicano did. He saw that as things might be changing a little bit around here. You know, and maybe he saw some maybe not necessarily improvements, but he saw some of the things that there was much more trade between the Native Americans, even though it was bad. It also had a good element to it, so there was trade going on. Some Native Americans were planting their crops just like the European was. And they were actually starting to, I'm not going to say make some money, but they started to get a little bit of prosperity going, just like the Europeans. But they had become so Europeanized that were they actually still native people? Culturally, were they native? Was the culture of Opechancanough being destroyed before his eyes? And did he approve of that in his older age? And therefore he ensued for peace, which turned out to be a trick. I think he did, because otherwise he would have never gone for that trick. He would have said, no, this is a trick. I don't believe that these people will actually want peace. But there could have been that he could have thought, hey, look, I've spared this guy's some of these people's lives before. They see that I'm an old man. They might just want to allow me to die with some respect. Then whoever the next king is can deal with this. It could have been a kind of thing like that he was thinking. Who knows what he was actually thinking? All we do know is just after they shot him the second and last time in the back with a mortal wound this time, one that actually killed him, he did say that he would not have paraded the leader of the colonials through the street like that. He would have let him die with some type of dignity. So, perhaps all Opechancanough wanted to do in the very end is die with some dignity. He knew that he was going to get too old. At some point, he knew that the English was always after him. And it might get to the point where he'd be so old that he can't resist them anymore. He's just too old to fight. And so maybe he didn't have any choice. Maybe his only real choice was to have a peace agreement with them. Maybe that was it. Maybe you looked around and said, well, who can take my place is strong enough to deal with them? It seems like the English has found almost every avenue that I can recruit someone to preserve the people and turn this person into one of their trader type people. Turn them into basically a sellout. So maybe he looked around and said, well, maybe I'm better off just allowing the culture to shift. And maybe they have some type of, way for me to just finish my older years in this cultural shift. You really don't know what he was thinking, but you do know that he was thinking that he was going to get some type of, there was a diplomatic relationship going down, and he was going to get some type of way out. He was going to get some type of negotiation where he could finish his years with some type of peace. And he could establish some type of peace for his people. Which that wasn't the case. He couldn't establish any peace for his people. And that's how it goes, So, that's how that goes. And what I'm doing now is kind of painting in one of the Native American soldiers. He's kind of on attack a bit. And I'm kind of going a little bit more back and forth with this. And, you know, and basically there's some painting that I've done earlier on an earlier day. To some level, I'm trying to fix a bit. Some level, I'm trying to fix a bit. And hopefully I would not be disturbed. I'm in my studio. And because I'm in the middle of doing what I'm doing here. Okay, so now I'm kind of fixing some of these details here. And there's a lot going on with some of the negative space in here. So what I'm going to do is start addressing some of this, because I have positive space in here, but I also have background space. So, and these are smaller elements, so they're going to be harder to see in terms of separating them, background and foreground. And but I think what I can do is I can start tackling other elements. And it's very, very easy to, you know, it's not very easy, but it's kind of easy to get you know, until everything gets blocked out, you can get a little bit lost with some of your block elements that you're trying to block. You can get a little smidge lost with it. And what I'm trying not to do is I'm trying not to get lost with that. So that is the story that's going on now with this painting. Opec Chicano was having second thoughts. I mean, Powhatan Tsenacommacah. Opec Chicano is not having any second thoughts. He knows exactly what he needs to do. Powhatan Tsenacommacah had second thoughts. And it proved to be a decisive decision in what will happen in the future with his people. And it proved to be that he made a very poor decision. And most likely what he should have done was allowed Matoaka, if they were going to kill her, he probably should have allowed her to be killed. Though I can understand that that's a very difficult decision for a father to make. And even though he was a very tough man, Powhatan Tsenacommacah clearly cared quite a bit about his daughter. And basically he sacrificed the future of his country, his people, reserved her life. But if he would have known that she would have just such a little bit more life to live, she was in the hands of a very ruthless person. And he should have known that there was no chance that she was going to live a long life in that scenario. And so he could have made a different decision, but he did not. Because of his humanity, he did not. So you're talking about somebody who was very, very humane, actually, if you think about it. He had a conscience. He had, he cared about his daughter. And he wished that, he wished no harm to happen to her.